This is Richard Wolff. Let's be blunt from the first second. While Donald Trump was screaming America first into a microphone, he was quietly handing the 21st century energy empire to Beijing on a silver platter. Think about that for a moment. The man who bragged he was tougher than anyone on China spent 4 years making every decision that China's leadership could only dream of: gut climate policy, worship oil, sabotage green tech, and mock science on live television. It sounds like satire. It isn't. Because while Trump was cheering drill baby drill at rallies, China was drilling into something far more dangerous for American power: the architecture of a post oil world. Not opinion, strategy. They looked at the Malacca dilemma, that fragile artery of oil tankers the U.S. Navy could choke in a week, and made a radical decision: change the body, not the artery. Electrify everything, kill the leverage. Here's the twist nobody in a red hat wants to hear. Every time Trump promised to bring back coal, Beijing smiled. Every time he mocked electric cars as a scam, Beijing smiled wider. Every time he called climate change a hoax, the Chinese Politburo had one less obstacle on the road to building the world's green supply chain on their terms, not ours. Picture this: Trump on stage, bathed in golden rally lights, fist in the air, crowd roaring as he vows to resurrect the beautiful, clean coal. Cut to the Gobi Desert at dawn, endless rows of solar panels stretching beyond the horizon, high voltage lines slicing across the sky like steel nerves, feeding a continent sized machine. Same planet, same decade, two completely different centuries. Trump sold his base a fantasy about energy independence by doubling down on 20th century fuels that America does not control globally, in markets America does not fully dictate, on a planet that is visibly breaking down. China, meanwhile, played a longer, colder game: remove oil from the equation wherever possible, shift the battlefield from sea lanes and pipelines to grids, batteries, and minerals. Trump thought the game was about tankers and tariffs. Beijing quietly rewrote the rules to be about lithium, cobalt, and grid dominance. And here is the economic punch you are not supposed to see on Fox News. Under Trump, the U.S. lost critical years in the race to dominate green industries that actually create the next wave of high value jobs. While he was slapping tariffs like stickers on Chinese goods, Chinese firms were locking up mining rights, building mega solar farms larger than American cities, and scaling battery production to the point where US car makers now stand in line like customers, not competitors. Trump called himself a deal maker. But step back and look at the deal as Beijing sees it. America under Trump subsidizes oil, fractures alliances, exits climate agreements, and turns climate denial into a political identity badge. China turns that vacuum into a business model. One side shouts at the windmills, the other side manufactures them, installs them, finances them, and then sells the grid software that keeps them running. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's strategic malpractice. When a president turns energy policy into a culture war performance, he doesn't just hurt the planet, he weakens his own country's leverage in the single biggest power shift of this century. While Trump was playing to the cameras, Beijing was wiring the future panel by panel, battery by battery, grid by grid, in a world where American slogans won't keep the lights on and won't move a single train. The terrifying image we're left with is simple: an American president shouting at crowds in an aging oil state, and somewhere far away in a silent control room in Western China, a technician watching the flows of a continental grid that no US president can sanction, blockade, or tweet away. That gap between spectacle and strategy becomes brutal once you look at what Trump actually did with power, not what he shouted into a microphone. On paper, he promised energy dominance. In practice, he engineered dependence on volatile oil markets, dependence on 1,970 seconds infrastructure, dependence on a political fantasy that the world would politely stop moving toward renewables just because he sneered at wind turbines. He ripped the United States out of international climate agreements like a reality show host storming off a set, then sold it to his base as sovereignty. What did Beijing see? Not strength. They saw a major competitor voluntarily stepping back from the negotiating table where the rules of the next energy system are written. While Washington under Trump treated climate as a culture war trigger, Beijing treated it as a procurement plan, a multi-decade shopping list for minerals, factories, ports, grid lines. Look at the pattern. Roll back fuel efficiency standards so American automakers can keep selling heavier, thirstier vehicles a little longer. Cheer fracking booms that lock communities into short-term jobs and long-term pollution. Slap tariffs on imported solar panels that US installers actually need to bring costs down. Combine those moves and you don't get energy independence. You get a country burning more fuel, paying more for it, and falling further behind in the industries that will decide who writes the rules in 2050. Meanwhile, Chinese planners were staring at their Malacca dilemma and making the opposite calculation. Oil sea lanes equals weakness, electric grids equals strength. So they poured hundreds of billions into solar, wind, nuclear, batteries, and ultra high voltage lines that stitch distant deserts to coastal megacities. Trump's answer to American vulnerability was to pump harder. Their answer was to design a system that doesn't flinch when a tanker stops moving. There's a cinematic image that captures this divergence. On one coast, a Rust Belt town in the US watching another refinery flare its last gas, workers waiting for the next political promise that never quite becomes a pay stub. On the other side of the world, a new industrial zone rising on the edge of a Chinese desert, assembling batteries and EVs that will be shipped to the very markets Trump claimed he was protecting. One skyline dimming, the other wiring itself to the future. Trump's defenders love to talk about cheap gasoline for the forgotten men and women. But cheap at what cost? When policy chases the next election instead of the next decade, the bill arrives somewhere else, in factories that can't compete with subsidized Chinese green tech, in allies who no longer trust US. Leadership on climate, in workers who discover that the new jobs in batteries and grids and EVs are not in Michigan or Ohio, but in provinces they'll never set foot in. The harsh truth is this: by turning energy into a loyalty test instead of an investment strategy, Trump didn't shield American workers from change. He left them standing unprotected in the crosshairs of it. And buried inside that gap between Trump's show and China's strategy is the ugliest truth of all. His politics didn't just slow America down, they actively cleared the runway for Beijing's green empire to take off. While Chinese planners were drawing 2060 carbon neutral timelines on whiteboards, Trump was promising a second term built on ripping up what little green industrial policy the US had left. That isn't just denial, that is sabotage dressed up as patriotism. Look at the timing. As China was commissioning solar capacity at a pace that dwarfed the rest of the world, the United States finally passed a serious response, hundreds of billions in clean energy subsidies to claw back some manufacturing, to rebuild supply chains, to give American workers a slice of the future. And what did Trump do? He went on stage and vowed to terminate those subsidies, mock EVs again, and resurrect a fossil fuel nationalism that Beijing has already outgrown. In financial markets, that sounds like this. One major power tells investors, your projects are safe here for 30 years. The other says, every 4 years, we might blow it all up for ratings. The numbers tell the story with a cold precision. China now controls upward of 80% of global solar manufacturing, close to 70% of battery cell output, and dominates the refining of the minerals that feed both. Those are not abstract percentages, they are choke points. If you need panels on a roof in Berlin, if you need a battery pack in Detroit, somewhere in the chain there is a Chinese company, a Chinese bank, a Chinese port. Under Trump, America's response was tariffs and slogans. Under China's model, the response was mines, grids, factories, ports, and diplomatic deals tied together like wiring in a circuit box. Trump likes to talk about strength and leverage, yet his energy politics did the opposite. They weakened allies, fractured coalitions, and left democratic economies overexposed to a supply chain built under authoritarian direction. When he insulted European leaders, he didn't just damage NATO dinners, he fractured the very bloc that might have helped the US build an alternative to Chinese green hardware. When he hugged oil dictators and sneered at climate conferences, he didn't project dominance. He signaled to much of the world that Washington wasn't serious about the next energy order, only about replaying the last one. The twist that stings the most for his own voters is this. The workers he claimed to champion are exactly the ones most likely to be stranded if America loses this race. The factory in Ohio that could have been retooled for batteries becomes a casualty of policy whiplash. The machinist in Pennsylvania who could have been building grid components watches the contract go to a firm linked to a Chinese state bank. The town in Texas that could have attracted a solar manufacturing plant sees investment cross the Pacific instead, searching for regulatory stability and industrial planning that doesn't swing with a polling cycle. So we arrive at a brutally simple image. On one side of the world, a Trump rally under stadium lights, red hats in the crowd, chants about energy dominance, echoing off concrete, a former president promising to torch the very incentives that might give his country a fighting chance. On the other side, at the edge of a desert, a control room lit by the glow of screens, engineers monitoring the flow of power across thousands of miles of lines to cities, to trains, to ports, to factories producing the hardware that will define who holds real leverage in the 21st century. Two models of power, two definitions of sovereignty playing out in real time on the same grid, under the same sky, on a planet that does not care about anybody's slogans, only about who actually built the switches